This discussion focuses on responsibly sourced gold issues and options. And of course, one of the things we can say is that there's always some source that is responsibly sourced that we can come up with that may not be represented. So that's another thing that we can jump in on. The panelists for this discussion are Charlie Betts, who is Managing Director of Betts Metals and has been instrumental in founding Single Mine Origin and the recent launch of the related foundation. Rachel Brandrick is not with us. Gina D'Amato, forgive me, Executive Director of the Alliance for Responsible Mining. We're absolutely delighted to welcome Gina for the first time. Lester Friedlander, President of Clover II Corporation, who brings tremendous acuity to the conversation. And our Holly McHugh, Vice President of Sustainability and Social Impact at McHugh, and that is linked with the issue of salmon gold. And our moderator is John Mulligan, Head of Sustainability Strategy at the World Gold Council, and referred to by Gaetano in his remarks, and deeply cherished by us. So, without further ado, that panel.
So, good morning. Thank you all for being here. It's great to be back in New York. I managed to stay dry last night, which was quite remarkable. I think I've ever seen New York rain like that. We'll dispense with introductions because I think you've all heard kind of who we are and where we come from. We'll be talking about something we've already talked about quite a lot. So hopefully our comments can be made with reference to previous comments. I'd like to keep this as conversational as possible. It's a small room. If you heartily agree or heartily disagree, please feel free to express it appropriately. If you wish to raise a question whilst we're talking, we're happy for you to raise your hand and intervene. Is that okay with the panelists? Good. Okay. So the title, Responsibly Sourced Gold, and we've already kind of touched upon it in quite some detail. I often use the phrase that responsible sourcing is foundational. And as you heard, in addition to the World Gold Council, I preside over the Sustainable Development Commission for the World Jewelry Confederation, SIBJO, and that commission became the Sustainable Development Commission after several years of being the Responsible Sourcing Commission. And people said, what's the difference? Why did you change the name? Well, first of all, responsible sourcing, defining what we mean by responsible sourcing, the issues we've already discussed, chain of custody, transparency, perhaps traceability, those terms refer to your supply chain, your relationship with your supply chain, the relationship with your source. I would suggest that there is a broader issue of sustainable impacts, and to some extent that's looking beyond the gate, looking beyond your direct business to consider indirect impacts or secondary impacts. I'm going to suggest we focus primarily on responsible sourcing, but I am fully aware that several people will want to comment on broader impacts and this idea of sustainability beyond responsible sourcing. But first of all, let's talk about definitions. Might I ask each of you just to quickly say, what does responsible mean to you? I'll start with you, Jim.
Well, it's a nice, simple question. What's responsibly sourced gold? I think it's an incredibly complex answer that I could probably, spend the whole hour on. So I don't propose to, but I think, essentially the area I focused on is within LSM, and I think actually the World Gold Council do a great job with the RGMPs of defining what responsibility looks like as a baseline in that area, whether it's how you manage your cyanide or how you engage with local employment or your awareness of your environmental and social impact. But obviously there's different definitions within the different categories, whether it's, the corollary of I'm responsibly sourcing my gold from an LSM does not mean that if someone's just buying their gold from a refiner who's compliant with the LBMA's responsible sourcing principles, is that irresponsible? No, of course it's not. So I prefer to kind of look at this through the frame of best practice within the different categories.
So just, as you mentioned, the RGMPs, some people, we spend a lot of time talking acronyms here. Maybe you just want to explain what they are.
So the responsible gold mining principles is a framework set up by the World Gold Council to define what responsible gold mining looks like, and there are other internationally recognized standards like IRMA, like ICMM, and there's lots of work going into consolidating those standards. We, as having set up single mine origin, we absolutely didn't want to add yet another standard into the mix, so we prefer to lean on John's organisation and others to provide that definition, which we then use as a baseline to define a responsible source within LSM, but then we want to go a lot further into looking at transparent availability of disaggregated data.
One more question before we move on. You mentioned SMO, another acronym. Do you want to explain what that means?
Sure. Single mine origin, gold it's effectively fully traceable, responsibly sourced gold. So what it means is, we may touch on, we've already touched on traceability a bit this morning. Our view is that without total transparency down the supply chain of gold, you can't really have full accountability for a source. So we have three pillars with single mine origin. One is it's fully traceable to a source, which means it's remained fully segregated through the refining process, and there's a framework of audit around that, that there's responsibility standards in place at our sources, and that the sources provide disaggregated data around a whole range of ESG metrics, whether it's carbon per ounce or whether it's social spending and so on.
Thanks. So you mentioned, obviously, that primarily this is LSM, it's gold established in frankly, listed, shall we say, transparent mines. There's, I guess, a question, I'll come to you, Gina, because your organisation operates in a slightly more informal context, I think it's fair to say, in some cases. So how, in those informal contexts, and we've kind of heard some of the challenges, at least alluded to, how do you evidence responsibility?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. Indeed, and first of all, I want to thank you for being here today, and listen to us and what we have to say about what is responsible gold and how to source responsibly. Our organization, the Alliance for Responsible Mining, we work mainly with artisanal and small-scale miners, and that's quite important to mention that and to revisit that topic, because actually it's the main source of income for a lot of communities, a lot of people, and I'm talking about more than 50 million people who depends on this type of livelihood. And coming from that, we need to adapt the way we understand how these communities are working. Standards is a way to complement local regulations, and it sets certain rules and patterns to put the level higher. But at the same time, we need to understand local perspectives and which ones are the main challenges that we're talking about. It's not the same when we're working, for example, in the Andes in Peru with communities that come from the Aymara communities or the Quechua communities. It's different than when we work at the same time in Peru, but in the Amazon regions. Completely different challenges. So understanding that, it's going to give us the basis for understanding what is responsibility. Now, from the Alliance for Responsible Mining and our Fair Mine initiative, that's what we have been working for the last almost 20 years already, we managed to prove that it is possible to have responsible source gold and to put it available to refineries, to small jewelers as well. And that is important because this morning we were discussing about consumers, if they were aware or not. Actually, I do believe they're really aware, and I do believe it's not just a matter of new generations. Everyone, it's asking questions, but we also have a role in mentioning what is important, what should you be looking for. And our experience has been that thanks to these consumers, thanks to jewelers, we continue over here because aid has been diminishing increasingly the last years. And in order to have someone, a technician, helping these communities to develop, capabilities, we need to pay for this technical assistance. And therefore, your support has been really important for us. And I'm sorry I'm expanding myself that much, but that's how we understand responsibility. It's not one size fits all, but understanding what are we talking about, and then going over there, working with them, finding local solutions, and then working with you as well.
Okay, thanks. And I'm going to come back, just to prepare, I'm going to come back to a question around the boundaries between responsibility and irresponsibility. And I think we've heard about it in some of the stuff that Brad's mentioned earlier and others. But first of all, I think, Holly, I'm going to come to you. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, your company generally chooses to express a preference for recycled gold. I presume that's to kind of minimize and manage your footprint, but you do also occasionally, or please explain, participate in purchasing newly mined gold. What for you is the kind of sourcing policy? How does that reflect responsibility from your point?
Sure, and thank you, John, and thank you, Lisa, for having me. If you haven't heard of McHugh, we're about a 10-year-old jewelry company. Now your phones have heard it. Sorry, you're all going to get ads. So I would say that for McHugh, obviously, my general counsel would want me to say this. Obviously, let's start with legality. Is it legally mined? Is it not legally mined? That's the place we're going to start. That's pretty binary for us. The next piece that's very important is transparency or traceability. I'm going to say or, we can choose the word and in there, but for us, traceability isn't as binary. We see it as very much a continuum that we want to move our suppliers along. Yes, we have chosen recycled as our primary, but that's not the end of the line for us. I have a very hard time with the lack of reasonable country of origin information that we receive from our refiners and smelters. And I don't believe that recycled is frankly the answer. I know that my company agrees with me on that one. Part of the way that we are investing in our supply chain and investing in the future is something that Lisa mentioned and John just alluded to, is this project that we have with an organization called Regeneration. The gold is called salmon gold. No, it's not pink. Salmon gold, meaning that we are supporting the repair of rivers and water systems that support fish species that are migrating out to the ocean and back to freshwater, salmon, grayling, et cetera, et cetera. There are hundreds of thousands of orphaned and abandoned mines globally. We're talking former gold rush. They can be very small locations. They can be very large. This organization, Regeneration, is specifically working to repair those, and we get to make fully traceable earrings, ask me about them later, directly from that material that is fully traceable. Now, the problem with this is scalability, so we have a lot of work to do, but last year we bought 9 kilos. This year we bought 10.5. It's a gradual improvement for us, but there's these two sides. We definitely have this regeneration material that is coming in, and then I am working a lot behind the scenes on how to get more information on our recycled material from our smelters and refiners.
Thanks. And you've touched upon something I mentioned at the start, which is that kind of a sourcing policy that also considers broader impacts. In this case, both rehabilitation of discarded assets and ecosystems, and we can touch upon that in a second. I'm going to come to Lester. Lester, I'm going to quote back something you said, explaining that Clover 2 is leading the industry forward in traceable, ethically sourced gold. So it's quite a bold statement, if you know what I'm saying. And first of all, yeah, can you explain what that means, that ethical, traceable gold?
Our company was founded in 1988 as a gold jewelry division of a large diamond company. And from that point in time, we were involved in the promotion and expansion of gold jewelry as part of the broader scale jewelry industry. Over the years, we've determined that the process of producing something that you can be responsible for, if you use those words, is a flow down process. That means it goes all the way, it starts with every manufacturer, we're a contract manufacturer, that works for us, and understanding their companies, understanding their ethos, understanding what strictures they have in terms of running their company, and yes, the metal that flows into that company. But it's very important to understand how they treat their people, what standards they have in terms of safety in their company, what financial standards they have in terms of how they pay their people, and what benefits they give their people. And for the last over 2 decades, we've been involved in understanding each one of our companies. We use many of the companies that are involved in audit, and we have a thorough review of every company. We also support understanding, we supply all the gold we manufacture. That means there is no one that can supply gold to us that we don't furnish for their production. We furnish probably about 3 tons of metal. We're pretty close to 100,000 ounces of metal to probably 25 different suppliers on 4 different continents. And what we do is we, through our involvement, we want to bring that information back to the consumer. And that's an ongoing process that we have right now in terms of knowing how to educate the consumer through the use of a blockchain from the point where the gold comes out of the ground to the refinery and onward through their production. Ultimately, the goal will be to furnish the consumer with information regarding the entire mapping of their gold jewelry. And now you say, well, why would we want to do this? Well, gold is $3,300 an ounce plus. You're dealing with a high-priced luxury item that somebody who is going to have the wherewithal to purchase might have the affinity to want to know a little bit more about what they're purchasing. We also believe that as gold increases in price, the nefarious use of that metal to fund drugs, guns, human trafficking, it becomes much more attractive because it takes a lot less of that metal to compensate whoever the parties involved in this illegal trade are. And therefore, the strictures that we have to apply to understand all of our counterparts are more detailed. And for the most part, our goal is to ultimately raise the level of the product so that people can appreciate it. Otherwise, we're not really interested in being the next lab-grown diamond, where people determine that costume jewelry will once again rise, and we'll go from vermeil jewelry down to why the hell buy silver? I mean, that's 38,000 ounce, so let's go with brass and plate that. So the only way we're going to exist and we're going to grow our units and expand the base of our business is by bringing something to the consumer where they can appreciate it. We've been involved with the World Gold Council probably going back 30 years when you were involved in the consumer aspect. The business has moved to much more of ETF and and financial investment as far as the dollars that World Gold Council spends to support the industry. But I go back a long way with the organization, and we have to find sponsors once we develop the methodology that we can communicate this information, because we will not be able to make the trip ourselves, because there's too much involved in promoting gold jewelry to the masses, and being able to show what the attributes of gold are, and what it puts back into the earth. We deal with large consortiums of gold manufacturers, gold mines, and we find that the larger entities do put back quite into the community. They put back anywhere, depending upon the group, from $60 million to $100 million. And that money that's put back shows the social consciousness of gold jewelry, and that it's not just an affinity to wear on your wrist, but that when you purchase that, you're giving something back to society. I could go on, but I don't want to.
No, thanks. There's a lot there already, but thanks for that. I have a further question, and I feel obliged to answer your question regarding the World Gold Council withdrawal from the jewelry industry, which is, let's be honest, a previous CEO decided the World Gold Council could not add value by participating in the jewelry space. That has changed, but it goes back to the previous conversation. When I started, because I'm fairly long in the tooth, 60 to 70% of our spend went on marketing for jewelry. However, to go back to Brad's point, the CEO at the time, and to some extent our current strategy, is that's not how we can add value. And the add value is somewhat like dealing with these big strategic problems now of trying to say, how do you encourage formalization? How do you create policy discussions that will be material? That said, we're also willing to put money into transparency systems and trying to, raise the bar. So just not defending the World Gold Council, I think its withdrawal from the jewelry industry was rather savage and had consequences. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, I think it does tie to that. Where can you make a material difference? Where can you actually be an agent of change? I'm going to go back to your question, however, because you said you source, I think, from the mine, and you then supply that gold or monitor it through the supply chain, and then supply that gold to your counterparties within your business.
We cannot state that we exclusively source gold from the mine. Do we run single lines of refining for various projects? Yes.
Okay.
The issue is, and the greater issue is, that it's all under pilots, because until we can express that to the consumer, then we're just self-effacing. Because I say, well, it's great, I have something that I can tell you I know exactly where it came from, but I can't tell you exactly where it came from. Yeah. So, I mean, there's the conundrum that we have to be able to make that leap. Yes, people ask me to manufacture given products that they want to know exactly where it came from, and we do that. But for the most part, we are a small part of a large industry, and when you take one of the largest players in the industry who uses the term repurposed gold. What is repurposed gold? I mean, it befuddles me to understand how somebody could say repurposed. It's not recycled, it's repurposed. There's very little that goes into giving the consumer a better understanding of what their gold is and where it comes from. And what I said before is that although it's, we're investing a great deal in terms of raising the level of what gold jewelry is for the ultimate consumer, we cannot, without the help of bodies such as the World Gold Council, ultimately take a platform and roll it out so that the biggest players in the industry, let's look at RJC. What was RJC? It started with a few players that came in, and slowly but surely everybody said, those are standards that I have to assimilate into my business. Well, if sourcing of gold and the means by which you acquire it and the whole manufacturing process became much more transparent, where you could show somebody something about every step of the way where their gold went from the mine to a finished product, because for the most part, our focus is on the final manufacturing process. That's where we put our time.
Sure, understood. And I think we're going back to the issue of transparency. And transparency comes at a cost, or can come at a cost. And I think both SMO and to some extent fair mine gold require a degree of segmentation. And segmentation comes at a cost. It's from a refiner's perspective, it is actually often quite challenging to economically refine segmented gold. And we can talk about recital maybe afterwards. Happily have been engaged deeply in that conversation.
Don't worry, I have thoughts.
But is not our whole business about premium? Premium is what it's all about.
So my next question to my co-panelists is that issue of the premium, because I think both your products attract a premium, both are based on a premium for different reasons. Charlie, could you just talk about SMO and attracting a premium to a product line, or?
Yeah, I can. I mean, our focus is really on avoiding a premium. So, yes, there are additional costs in our supply chain because you have an extra tier of audit. You mentioned segregation at the refinery. That comes at a cost, and sending in Bureau Veritas or Alex Stewart or someone to, check that gold really was refined in segregation also has a cost. But I think the difference with what we're doing, because we're working with large-scale mines, we're working with large batches of gold, we have that economy of scale. Actually, the premium's pretty tiny. Last year, we moved more than $1 billion of gold, SMO gold. That meant that the premium, actually, it's very economical for a refinery to segregate 100,000 ounces of gold. But there's really very little premium, so we can absorb that. And, the idea being that to a jeweler, it's a sort of no-brainer. Yeah,
I think that's really useful to know, that one of the great challenges of some of these solutions is finding scalable solutions. Jean, do you want to comment on the premium from the kind of fair mine perspective?
Yeah, thank you, John, for addressing that topic. You see, the basic, when we started Fairmind, the premium was going to be understanding our theory of change, what was going to pull or to change the behavior of the miners and of this situation. And initially, it started working quite well, but then it became costly, or the market was not willing to pay for those premiums. And it's a shame, I have to admit it is a shame, because with those premiums we managed to do a lot of social investments and infrastructure, community infrastructure, and I can give you a lot of examples of how that changed a community. And but then what we are coming on with is, alternatives. There's still people who wants to pay the premium, and good for them, because that impact, you are going to be able to see it when you go and visit our mine sites. But when not everyone can pay for that, there are some other alternatives. For example, we complement this approach with the Fairmine credits, which actually what they do is they reward that good behavior, those best practices, and then you can kind of flexibilize that premium and pay for that, so they can continue sourcing responsibly. At the end of the day, the way we look at it is not the product, but the process, what it creates in the community. So we raise the level of the impact of what's going on. So we have the credits, and also we have another alternative that helps a lot, which is the Fairmine membership. I'm sorry, I'm also talking about this because it's important. You see, maybe we are not achieving a lot of gold bars exported, but we know we can scale that up, or at least the impact that we are creating, it's significantly enough to transform these communities that we are working with. And that's important for us.
But, so one more question. Is it a scalable solution, though? I mean, in the sense that I understand absolutely it can have very positive impacts and it can be of great useful practice in certain areas with certain conditions,
Yeah.
but is it scalable as a solution as we try and address some of the bigger issues regarding the opaque, transparent, irresponsible / dare I say it, moving towards the illegal ASM? How does it impact or interact with those issues?
Yeah, thank you, John, for that. Yes, it is a scalable solution. What we need is full commitment of the market. We need commitment that they are going to continue sourcing from these responsible and certified mines. The problem we find sometimes is that we go on a different speed because it takes time to have these capabilities in the communities or to source the gold. We're talking about small-scale mining, so we cannot talk about tons of ore process. So it takes time, but if we have enough demand, then for sure the supply, it's going to be over there. But that commitment is what makes the change between intention and real transformation.
But just to continue on that, you mentioned demand, and if you had sufficient demand, does that mean that this is a demand-led program? You basically, how do you build that demand?
Well, we've been building it through the years by, talking with jewelers and with refiners and creating this niche market for this gold. And more and more, we have been able to establish continuous demand from some of them, but it's not been enough. And sometimes when we are facing the prices that we're facing at the moment, so there's a huge demand for everyone, and it takes time for our mines to be able to have enough amount of gold to be able to get into these markets. Yes.
Okay. Holly, you mentioned obviously that yes, there's recycled as the main part of your strategy, but that you are looking elsewhere. What are the criteria you apply to that looking elsewhere? Well, to both, in fact, all your sourcing.
So I want to be clear, recycled isn't the main part of our strategy, it's what's currently happening. And that's partly because a lot of decisions were made before I got there, if I'm being honest. I've only been there 3 years, so, give me some time. But, we sort of disagree that there should be these massive premiums on recycled. Unless you can tell me it's pre or post consumer, I'm really not interested in paying that premium, frankly. And we're really interested in having more of that traceability. I'm willing to pay a premium if you can give me reasonable country of origin for your feed as a whole. If you can give me any mass balance accounting, I'll happily pay a premium. Very interested, actually. But it's the problem for us is that we aren't buying it directly. However, we are nominating suppliers for our jewelry manufacturers to make it through, and we are doing that slowly. At my previous employer, very blue, pretty boxes, I formerly worked with the chief supply chain officer, who is now at the company I'm working for again. Andy Hart and I know a lot about metal traceability. We spent a lot of time getting to 99.8% traceability of all of our precious metals right before I left. So this is something we're very familiar with, and we are interested in moving away from recycled. I think part of the premium, I just want to say, can be philanthropic. There's no reason to not use your philanthropy dollars to help support organizations so that eventually we can get more of that feed there. I think that's a path that quite a few have taken, but I think it's a great way to get that, for companies, brands to be supporting that artisanal mining. And especially after getting the stats on the number of individuals or the percentages of gold that's coming through artisanal, we know that's where we need to do it. But I guess I also just want to say that we don't we see our lack of perfection as a thing to talk about. We see that, the fact that we're talking about a continuum, go ahead, have a look at our sustainability report. We know this amount came from a group of known minds. We didn't know who because our supplier wouldn't tell us. And we do that for every precious material. So what can our supplier tell us? How can we move them along a continuum? Can they tell me the country? Can they tell me the region within the country? Can they tell me the mine? This is a way to move them along that continuum. This is a way to develop trust with them. And for us, really, that's what's most critical.
Thanks. Just to go back on that comment of transparency within the recycled supply aspect. As you know, the RJC embedded post-consumer and pre-consumer inputs now into the requirements, so you should be able to ask those questions. In fact, you should demand those questions.
Very thankful.
I was part of that process in the International Standards Organization, and without going into too much detail, it was deeply problematic and exposed to me some of the raw politics of supply chains when you're talking about various national standards organizations and the governments behind them. That said, there is now a standard which the RJC have embedded. It is now referenced within will be referenced within the CIBJO Jewelry Precious Metals Blue Book. The LBMA are looking to embed it possibly in RGG 10. So we do have an improvement in terms of transparency on recycling. It was a very painful process. Christina wanted to ask a question. Yeah, sorry, there's one coming.
Yeah, Christina Villegas. I have two questions. First is for Holly. If you could just kind of maybe educate us a little bit about just kind of taking the halo off of recycled. Because I think a lot of people think, oh, recycle, that must be great for the environment. It must be doing a great thing. Let me rush towards that. I think not everybody's on the same page here. And then for people who do want to run to recycle for many reasons that are legitimate, I know there's SCS post-consumer recycled, which is an amazing option. Folks should do that. What are other options that might be available? I just want to tap your knowledge since you're like deep in this, that people can look at that might be on the market already. And then you said you're kind of looking at some options from different folks. If you could kind of educate us on that. And then my other question is for Gina. If you could just maybe expand. I think your point was there's limited. It kind of takes a while for ASM Gold to come on the market for fair mind, right? But I think it's important to say that just because it's ASM doesn't mean it's not responsible, right? And so certification is available for only a few. So there's less than 20 groups in the world that are fair mind, right? And there's 45 million miners out there, right? And so there are, certifications available for only a few who have the resources who are being supported. So just because they don't have certification doesn't mean they're not responsible. So it just takes a long time, and it depends who's around them. And so don't only look for that. Don't only look for that. So I just wonder if you could kind of talk about the other groups that you might be working with that are responsible, that might be doing other things that might not have their certification yet, or might not be looking for that, but that you are working with, that people can support.
So there was
Do you want me to start?
yeah, Holly
Okay.
first and then.
So removing the halo, and this might not be a popular opinion. I'm really okay with being unpopular on this one. I think it's a massive loophole. I think it's like a semi-truck size loophole that we get to sort of drive through. Because the definition of recycled, recycled has been used as a word for so often in so many other commodities that there's an assumption of what recycled means. But, is a casting tree really recycled? I mean, I can sort of understand why, I mean, you mentioned repurpose. I can sort of understand why they didn't want to use the word recycled there, but I also disagree that we need to make up new words or, use words that might not be commonly understood. The risk that I see is that as soon as our consumer understands this, I don't know if anybody remembers what happened like 15 years ago with paper, how mad people were when they were like, you said this was recycled, but it's only pre-consumer. That kind of lack of information or that lack of transparency on that industry's part was a problem. I think because what we're selling is so emotional and expensive, we're at a higher risk if people start to understand, if our consumer understands that. At McHugh, we have a very young consumer. We are dropping new product every week. Just pause for effect on that. New product every week. And we have about 30,000 influencers. Okay? So the risk there is very, very great. So we spend time in our report talking about what does recycled mean? How do we define this? What does it mean to us and what are we hoping for? Because we think that a more educated consumer is actually gonna, benefit us, frankly. Also, 1 in 8 of our purchases are made, like they're clicking the button, I made this purchase because sustainability. So I have the proof internally, by the way, that was like 30 million purchases last year. So this isn't a small number of people, that's not 30 million people, want to be clear, but purchases, they can make as many as they want throughout the year. But 1 through 8, 1 out of 8 is great. In terms of options, frankly, I really struggle. And have spent a lot of time speaking with refiners about what they'll provide to me. If they're willing to provide mass balance accounting, fantastic. But there are very few that are willing. SMO options are fantastic. I'm really interested in that. But then it's about nominating them as a supplier and making sure that path can actually work. We're essentially making our own supply chain right now through this organization, Regeneration. It's a partnership with us, Apple, and Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto putting in like 100 of these abandoned and orphaned mine sites into a pot for Regeneration to work on and fix. Some of them are not Rio Tinto locations. That's fine. But it's a lot of placer mining, former placer mining. Some of them are very, very small, but I got to visit one like 2 weeks ago, and it was really great because I was there 2 years ago. Anyway, it's, Holly gets emotional, FYI. It makes me really emotional to see the improvement in these locations and what we've been able to do. So frankly, I'm open to getting more information from people, and I don't really have options. Unfortunately, that material out of Regeneration, we're the only jewelry company currently able to buy it. But the goal is to be able to have more than we can purchase. And I'm really excited for that day when it's actually too much for us and we can, get that material out into the market.
Thanks. Before we go to Gina,
just to jump in quickly on the recycled options, I've witnessed, I'm sure you all have, I think over the last couple of years, there's been a kind of real move to kind of knock recycled gold in many ways. And I think, to me, there's an issue around the claims some brands make using recycled gold, but in itself, it's something we've been doing for centuries, and it's a massively important part of the trade. I think what we're going to start seeing is a great deal more options of fully traceable, and it's a shame Rachel's not here on the panel because Royal Mint are doing something really interesting about recovering gold from electronic waste that was going to landfill, and that's it was going to landfill. That's, to my mind, proper recycling. At BETS, we do something around recovering silver from X-ray film that was going to landfill, and I think there's going to be a proliferation over the next couple of years, talking to some of the European refineries as well, of let's have a really set apart different categories within recycled, and I think you will see plenty more options.
Yeah. There are a couple brand new refineries coming out that are doing electronics, like in Canada and in a few other places that got the entire Canadian government's old machinery, and they have the contract to be able to do that, so there's a consistent feed, but they're just getting up and running.
Yeah, so it's more expensive to recycle
sure.
e-waste, and so you get segment. This is the issue about segmentation, and so just to, sorry, I'm going to come to you in a second. I'm going to put a slight counterpoint to this recycled. All gold, it was mined once. All gold will probably be recycled, and the question is, we can invent 15 different names for the circularity of the gold supply chain. Actually, the definitions that have been worked on allow us to be fairly specific if we wish, and this is the question about the refiner. Ask the refiner the questions, to be specific about the inputs that go into the re-refining process. And if you're happy with mass balance, fine. If you're happy with segmentation, make the request. It may cost you more.
Sure.
But I think this issue, the one point I would have is this issue with the assumption that the term recycled or recycled gold comes with a halo. It does in the West. The big physical gold markets of the world, it doesn't at all. The conversations we had in China about this, and they kept saying, gold is gold for us. And so yes, there's an issue of provenance and sourcing, and I agree entirely, but don't assume that this is being used for greenwashing. Actually, when we looked at the way that plastics, you mentioned paper, in the modern certification schemes are, the definition for gold that the RJC are now using and others are more stringent than any of them. And the International Standards Organization said your definition of recycled, even though sadly it was shot down within ISO, your definition is actually more stringent. So you can have transparency, but I think your point is well made. You have to ask for it, make the demands. Sorry, Dina, there was
No,
the
it's
question.
okay, and I'm so happy I don't have to jump into that discussion.
Fair.
Me too.
Christina, thank you for that question. Yes, I want to amplify a little bit about what the initial question was about the possibilities of scaling up. Yeah, indeed, not everyone can achieve certifications such as Fairmine, because that's like the top of the certifications. There are other available at the moment, but we have also been working a lot with other alternatives such as craft, which helps these artisanal and ASM miners to start that progressive path. And this is quite important. Tomorrow I'll have the chance to talk more about this approach, which helps them to set the initial steps to start, putting away the main risk associated with mining. And most of them, they start being conformant with what the OECD due diligence asked for, and that's a huge step. Perhaps you don't see how important it is, but it creates a whole difference. So the craft code, for example, helps a lot. We developed that with a lot of allies. That's another message I would like to leave here in the table today, is that what we do, we don't do it on ourselves. We do it with all of you, working together with the jewelers as well and refiners, because that's the only way to raise the bar, and that's the only way to create real changes and going not just from intentions but to reality. So that's how we work. And then you're going to have much more gold available. Yeah.
Okay, so is that a question or? Okay. I was going to mention, it's going to somewhat challenge Christina's position on how outrageous, I know. And is this issue not, I'm not disagreeing, but this issue of certification, and it's to do with a code. And you don't necessarily need certification. You do need something. And we've said before, we talked about illicit flows, we talked about illegality. People make comments like there are 20 million, 30 million, 40 million artisanal. You don't know. And you don't know because it's opaque. And it's opaque because people don't necessarily want to give you data. They want to share it. So the assumption is that a large number of those artisanal miners may be mining voluntarily or for their long-term livelihoods, but they may not. They may be being forced labor, they may be involved in criminal activity. So until we can define what responsibility is, which I think is a craft code-based, something like that solution, I think we have to be cautious. And I think the issue of, it's why we started, the issue of trust and responsibility all of us should be asking those questions. Now, that's I think what's been missing in the past. I think Brad again alluded to the fact that the industry had probably not been asking those questions as clear as it should have been. So sorry to interrupt. Estelle? Probably. I imagine so.
I've been working on certification schemes for gold and other minerals for 20 years, and the perfection is the enemy of the good. Yep. And I absolutely understand that at the end of the day, a consumer-facing brand has to have comfort that they're not going to be exposed to some form of brand damage. But ultimately, what we should be benchmarking is the rate of transformation and improvement, and not the level of perfection achieved across a number of indicators. And I really think there's a conceptual, a shift in ambition that we need to achieve at the sectoral level that is only facilitated if we use our marketing power to educate our consumers on our role as corporate citizens and enablers of social change. So I just want to put that out there because I know that that's not comfortable. And I know in other sectors that I work in, or other segments of the jewellery world, they have much more space for a higher risk appetite. Yes. And many of the luxury brands that I've worked with are extraordinarily and understandably risk averse. And that becomes a real barrier to them leveraging their brand and the market that they have to become a real partner for change on the ground. So often it is the smaller jewellers, like the ones, and the gems trade, the ones that Christina's worked with, the Moyo Gems, that are more able to do the higher risk but truly transformational work. And that's a real shame because they don't really have a lot of power.
Estelle, we're running out of time.
Okay, but I want to ask the panel, how do we help the sector make that shift from looking from perfection towards celebrating progress, like the craft code can help us achieve?
So that's going to be your last question, but sorry, Lisa, do you want to?
Well, I was just saying, I think these are issues. Oh, sorry. First of all, bad cop. But I think these are issues that we can pick up both at lunch, but also in the small-scale mining conversation. I hate to be the pragmatist here, but as you say, it's the progress to perfection, and we kind of need to keep the train running, because we haven't talked about either what gold as a vehicle for investment can do in terms of also helping to propel change. Having said that, and also having praised the specific, there are two things that are going to happen now. The first one is we're going to show a film, short film, Film-ini, that was made by Single Mine Origin for the launch of their foundation, which occurred recently. And following that, we are going to go into lunch, which is being provided, and there will be a conversation at that lunch about questions of gold and value. So that's what's happening, and love you all.
Thank you, and thank you to my panelists. Sorry to run out of time.
The founding principle behind Single Mine Origin Gold is that we believe passionately that mining, when done responsibly, is a powerful force for good.
It's estimated that less than 4% of the world's gold is publicly traceable, and we believe that without traceability, you can't properly have accountability for a source of gold. Single Mine Origin Gold provides fully traceable, responsibly sourced gold, and we're incredibly excited to now be working with Bellevue Gold.
Bellevue is pioneering simply because we're the first company to do this. No one has thought to put out a net zero gold product before, and we've put our money where our mouth is in terms of building a modern operation, changing our mining practices to reduce carbon emissions, and putting in industry-leading renewable energy power station.
We believe that Bellevue Gold is absolutely world-leading in its decarbonisation of gold mining, and this is providing an incredibly exciting new source of gold. What we are trying to achieve with SMO Gold is not some niche product. What we're trying to do is change the mainstream understanding of mining.
The industry has been thirsty for a mass market option for known provenance gold, and single mine origin offers that solution. Large-scale retailers in the US, such as Bergdorf Goodman and Neiman Marcus, are becoming more intentional about the responsible sourcing of the jewelry that goes in their case line.
Once we start asking the right questions and start saying, you know what, I know where the gold is coming. I have been on site. I see the QR code. I know what they're doing with the communities. I understand the impact.
If you're using recycled gold, you still don't know where it came from originally. You know, if you're engaging with the actual practice of the extraction and the people who do it, that's far more transparent.
We have found that customers are more confident in making high-value purchases when they know and understand the ethical background of the material used.
As a board member of the RJC, we're seeing a growing acceptance of the adoption of responsible practices into people's businesses. I think the industry is changing, and it's changing for the better.
Initiatives like SMO are doing is really valuable, not only because it is independently audited, but because they're focusing on traceability, which I think is a lot more relevant in the fine jewelry industry.
If you don't know where something comes from, then you can't trace any accountability to how your materials have arrived to where they are. Without that, people who made the products, people who extracted the gold from the earth become invisible. I think material provenance is the first step towards transparency and follow our ethical spectrum.
Following my first opportunity to work with Michaela Cole at the Met Gala in 2023, I was really blown away by Lauren wanting to wear my pieces for this year's Met Gala. It was very special for gold to come from Italy because Lauryn Hill chose to go as Ghanaian royalty, and it's just extremely important that that gold that she wore came from the region and the people, the culture that she chose to represent.
We're incredibly excited to now be launching the Single Mine Origin Foundation. The idea of the foundation is to double down on the positive environmental and social impacts felt around gold mining. With the initiation of the Single Mine Origin Foundation, we'll be supporting 3 core causes. Firstly, we'll be working with Critical Care International.
The project that CCI will be carrying out on behalf of the SMO Foundation and Endeavour Mining has 3 main components. The first of which is community health-based screening and treatment. The second of which is health education and health promotion. And the third is targeted medical interventions. We are enormously grateful to SMO and to donors who've contributed towards this noble cause for allowing us to have the platform to be able to take part in this important work in rural Senegal at this time.
We'll be working with Leadership for Conservation in Africa to rehabilitate the Tai National Park in Côte d'Ivoire.
The importance of Tai National Park cannot be understated, as it's one of the last vast rainforests left in West Africa. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and it's home of critically endangered species like the pygmy hippo or the western chimpanzee. The support of SMO's foundation will help increase and expand patrolling on the ground, but right now the most important task is increase the ranger presence on the ground in order to stop illegal mining and poaching. They bring more than funding because they bring influence. They can help attracting other donors. And when responsible businesses act positively in terms of nature conservation, they can also influence broader changes across the region.
We'll also be working with IUCN Netherlands on a project in Suriname to restore soil from mercury degradation after artisanal mining.
Artisanal mining has affected wildlife and jaguars specifically by deforestation, which has decreased their habitat and resulted in encroachment, which in turn has resulted in isolation of population and decrease of genetic diversity. The soil restoration project in and around Brownsburg aims to build corridors through deserted artisanal small-scale gold mining areas currently left barren and hopefully reduce the disruption to the habitat of wildlife.
As the initiative has grown, the ability to launch the Single Mine Origin Foundation is a big step forward in our development, and it allows us to double down on the promises and the commitment that responsibly sourced gold can have a lasting and positive impact on the communities and environments around the areas where that gold was mined. This isn't a difficult, small, exclusive club. This is for everybody, and everybody needs to adopt it.